Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, Volume 5. This is really exciting to say. We are over 50% done. Maybe it's like 52, 55% now. Who knows? But the point is, we are in a new book. Super duper excited. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 151, Roundup. Tudalung Banner was part of the eastern range of the Hongyan Mountains, northwest of First Sand Camp. From there, one could reach the lands of the 12 tribes of Biansha by riding directly east. Before this year, it had not been in contention, but as Li Bei drew its front line back again and again, this area had become a strategic point north of the main battlefield. Huhalu's squad had broken through the checkpoints and watchtowers ahead, so base camp was forced to confront them on the west side of Tudalung Banner. The two sides had already exchanged several verbal assaults across the marshlands. From border camp, Xiao Chirye had taken a circuitous route that brought him just south of base camp, but the collapse of the road had blocked the bridle path leading to base camp, and Tudalung Banner lay just east. Hassen's squad often patrolled in this area. If Xiao Chirye refused to leave the provisions and extricate himself and his men, he would no doubt come face to face with Hassen with the supplies in tow. The grain wagons were too heavy to maneuver quickly. Wu Ziyu's armored cavalry couldn't move freely through the mud, and the imperial army didn't have enough light cavalry to run interference. Under such circumstances, abandoning the wagons was the obvious option. It was much too dangerous to turn around and detour through Tudalung Banner. Before Wu Ziyu could protest, Chun Yang and the rest had already turned their horses' heads. This was a trust that couldn't be put into words. They obeyed Xiao Chirye unconditionally, regardless of any risk to their lives. If Xiao Chirye gave the command, they would act without hesitation. Standing among them, Wu Ziyu shuddered involuntarily. It was mid-afternoon, but the rain had turned the whole sky dark. Luckily, Gu Jin was well acquainted with this area and took the lead, guiding the convoy into Tudalung Banner. The grain wagons rolled carefully through the mud. The slightest misstep, and they would sink into the muck. Everyone stilled their breathing and squinted through the rain, not daring to let their guard down for an instant. Xiao Chirye planned to hide the grain wagons here. Even the most valiant Biansha tribesmen wouldn't rashly venture into Tudalung Banner. The marshland was just as difficult for them to navigate as for any Li Bei soldier. Besides, the rain hindered Hassen as well. If Meng couldn't fly, the Sacred Falcons couldn't either. Neither side had a clear view of the enemy's movements through the sheeting rain. They relied on their knowledge of the battlefield to counter each other. Such a delicate equilibrium could only be maintained in the storm. The minute the skies cleared, Xiao Chirye's squad would be crushed by Hassen's assault. Xiao Chirye rattled off orders. Wu Ziyu, stay with the wagons and guard the grain. Have your men use heavy chains. I want them to surround the convoy. The paths around Tudalung Banner were muddy, and the heavy armored cavalry grew even heavier when it rained. It was too easy for the horses' hooves to get bogged down in mud, so staying with the wagons was the most suitable task for them. The horse chains were one of Xiao Fengshu's innovations. By hooking them onto the horse's armor and linking them down the line, they could turn the cavalry into armor for the grain wagons. Even if Hassen broke through Xiao Chirye's diversionary attack and reached deeper into Tudalung Banner, he would be stopped, or at least delayed, by the cavalry's iron wall. Without moving, Xiao Chirye addressed the imperial army. Hassen is leading the Hanma tribe. They move quickly and aggressively. We shouldn't expect to catch up or stop them, but they should be on the east side of the banner, where there's plenty of scrub to conceal us. The Sacred Falcons can't patrol on rainy days. This is an opportunity. There was no doubt who was the stronger and who the weaker between them. Xiao Chirye couldn't let Hassen's squad remain intact. He would have no chance of winning that way. He split the imperial army into small groups to feel their way out of Tudolung's banner marshland and strung up ropes to trip the enemy's horses. Once they fell from the saddle, the unsuspecting Biansha horsemen would be diverted all over Tudolung banner. They would lose their advantage. Gujin would go around Hassen's squad and hurry to the front lines. Xiao Chuye turned and looked at him. If Zhao Hui didn't come, that means the Liuyang battalions were unable to move. The situation up north is probably more dire than we thought. At this point, we have to seek help from the front. Gujin had acquired his recent injury fighting in Tudolung banner. He knew the roads through the banner by heart. He acknowledged his orders and led a group of lightly equipped scouts on ahead. Lao Hu will take the northeast, and I'll head due east. Chunyang stays here. As Xiao Chuye spoke, he strode forward. Our first priority is to ensure these provisions are successfully delivered to the battlefield. By this point, Chunyang had followed Xiao Chuye all over Li Bei and had a clear picture of all the granary's reserves. If Xiao Chuye failed, Chunyang would have to release a falcon once the rain stopped and inform the northeast provisions trail to relocate army provisions up north without delay. As a supply squad, their lives were nowhere near as important as the provisions they carried for their fellow soldiers. They were in the foothills of the Hongyan Mountains here. The rain wouldn't be stopping anytime soon. As the Imperial Army moved into position, lying low in the mud, the cold seeped into their bones. Their inner garments, long since soaked through, clung to their skin. Crouching in the boggy soil, their fingers and toes were frozen within the hour. The autumnal rains of Li Bei cut like blades. It was only the beginning of the 8th month, yet the temperature had dropped so alarmingly it felt like snow might fall at any moment. The supply squad had yet to change into their thick, lined winter coats. Before heading out, Xiao Chuye had ordered them to swap the water they carried in their flasks for on horseback. Strong wine that could dispel the chill was a pivotal aid on this capricious, snow-blown frontier. Xiao Chuye nursed his flask of wine, one mouthful at a time, as he hunched in the mud. Historically, battles between Li Bei and Biansha did not extend beyond the 8th or 9th month. Any later meant risking the coming of snow, at which point both their grasslands would be ravaged by storms. During the long, harsh winter, Li Bei's craftsmen would tirelessly reforge and repair equipment for the armored cavalry. Meanwhile, Biansha would herd their flock of sheep southward. By unspoken agreement, both sides would enter a period of truce. The single notable exception had been the 3rd year of Xiande, when the Hanma tribe had ridden south and breached the banks of the Chashi River, raiding Zhongbo's granaries for the provisions they needed to fight on. Yet for the past few days, Xiao Chuye had felt an inexplicable premonition. There would be no truce this winter. Amur's assaults were too aggressive. If his incursion into Li Bei's territory in earlier spring was merely to plunder supplies, then right now, Amur seemed more like he was bent on a full-fledged war, with no intent to retreat. In transferring Hassen here from Tidong, Amur was bringing his most powerful troops to bear against Li Bei. It was a marked change from the small-scale skirmishes they had fought over the last few years. All of a sudden, the sound of hooves cut through the rain. Xiao Chuye closed his flask and held up 2 fingers, signaling the Imperial Army behind him to lay low. He did the same, his face almost brushing the mud. Only his eyes moved as he searched the brush for the source of the sound. Riders appeared through the curtain of rain, their horses throwing up mud as they galloped. Xiao Chuye watched them approach in silence, easing Wolf's Fang from its sheath as the distance between the Imperial Army and the Biansha riders closed. The pounding of hooves intensified, while the Biansha horsemen's shrill whistles were drowned by the rain. The ground under Xiao Chuye's palm trembled. He didn't move, and neither did the Imperial Army behind him. The enemy was right before them. A few more steps, and they would be trampling over the heads of the Imperial Army. The horse in the lead suddenly neighed, its front hooves caught in the rope. Its knees buckled as it fell. A wave of mud splashed over Xiao Chuye's face. He moved. Before the rider hit the ground, Wolf's Fang was flying free of its sheath. Xiao Chuye took the man's head off with a single stroke, and fresh blood spurted from the empty neck and flowed into the mud. The cavalrymen behind the soldier were caught off guard, their formation scattered in disarray. Xiao Chuye didn't give them a chance to regroup. The Imperial army was right behind him as he carved a path through the center of the Biansha horsemen. Mud and blood trickled down Xiao Chuye's neck and into his collar. The pungent sting of on horseback burned his stomach, heating his whole body. This attack was like a blow to the head. It disoriented the Biansha horsemen and had them scrambling to gather their wits. Both parties were small squads, fighting at close quarters, hacking at one another as the rainwater poured over them. The battle was over in minutes. By the time the Biansha horsemen pulled themselves together, the Imperial army had vanished, soundless, into the torrential rain. In all corners of Tudalung Banner, the Biansha squads were suffering similar assaults. Yet as soon as they tried to counterattack, these ruffian soldiers would shrink away. The Biansha horsemen found themselves blocked by the edge of Tudalung Banner's marshland. But whenever they tried to turn back and rejoin their fellows, the Imperial army would sneak up again and attack. After a few rounds, the Biansha horsemen were beyond fed up. They were unable to pick up speed in this terrain, and their men were scattered in all directions. They were like headless chickens shoved, kicked, and harassed by the Imperial army. Rage simmered in their guts as they fought. Xiao Chuye repeatedly hid behind the veil of rain. The Biansha horsemen turned this way and that, but couldn't make out his exact hiding place. The Imperial army hadn't the heavy armor and horses of the Libe armored cavalry. They could disappear from the Biansha horsemen's field of view as long as they kept low to the ground, as elusive as any shadow. Very quickly, Xiao Chuye's flask of wine was empty. The sky had long since gone dark. The Biansha horsemen were still trapped by the Imperial army on the fringes of Tudalung Banner, able to neither advance nor retreat. The Imperial army seemed to have victory within its grasp. Xiao Chuye had grasped the rhythm of the battle, but he didn't let it go to his head. It didn't matter if the Biansha horsemen showed weakness or resorted to intimidation. The give and take of attack and defense remained firmly in his control. Only, as time elapsed, there'd still been no sign of Hassen. The cold was even more biting at night. Xiao Chuye's boots were clogged with mud, and the rain made the ground slick. To prevent his blade from slipping from his grip, Xiao Chuye had wound a strip of cloth around the hilt and between his thumb and index finger. By now, the fabric was soaked through. He squatted and tore the sodden cloth away to replace it with a fresh one. A human's physical strength was limited. This sort of push-and-pull battle required both sides to be on high alert at all times. Their nerves were stretched taut. They couldn't afford to overlook the slightest detail. But even Xiao Chuye had to catch his breath sometime. He closed his eyes and shook his head twice, as if shaking off the numbness of the repetitive maneuvers. By the time the sun rose, the reinforcements from the front line Gu Jin had gone for would arrive. But tonight was critical. Heaven still favored Xiao Chuye. Though the rain had abated, there would be neither stars nor moon tonight. This inky darkness would remain the Imperial army's best disguise. He huffed out a breath of warm air and flexed his fingers before tightening his grip on Wolf's Fang once more. But as he pushed himself to his feet, disorderly footsteps echoed from the shrubbery. A hand brushed aside the leaves. Gu Jin. Xiao Chuye was immediately struck with foreboding. Sure enough, Gu Jin's expression was grim as he dropped to one knee and whispered, "Master, the roads to the front line are entirely blocked. Hassen's elite forces are stationed just to the southeast. They've cut off access." Xiao Chuye's heart sank as it hit him. He had walked into a trap. Any skilled general knew the principle of imposing his will on the enemy without allowing the enemy to impose their will on him. Xiao Chuye had scored one victory after another since leaving Chudu by being the one to take the initiative. As the first mover, he controlled the pulse and rhythm of the battlefield without fear of being outnumbered. Yet he had forgotten Hassen was the same kind of commanding general as he was. This fight in the rain was no coincidence. It was a meticulously planned roundup. From the time Xiao Chuye's squad first rode north, Hassen had already laid a trap to hunt and kill a wolf pup. While Xiao Chuye had been watching the Biansha horsemen, Hassen had also been observing him. Xiao Chuye thought he was taking the initiative, but he was merely paralyzing himself. The moment he made the call to head for Tudulung Banner, he had been forced into a passive position. The thunder of horses' hooves rose in the distance. Chapter 152. Hassen. Raindrops rolled down Hassen's scimitar, dripping along its sharp edge. His horse snorted hot puffs of air. Hassen had been waiting a long time in the rain. It was getting late. The world had descended completely into darkness. Unlike the men of Great Zhou, who habitually wore their long hair in a neat topknot, Hassen had a head of short red hair that was gathered unceremoniously into a small tail at the back of his head. After Huhulu's death, Bayim had been transferred to Hassen's troops. He tugged at the reins as he followed his new commander, wrapping up his treasured books of military strategy before tucking them back under his robe, pressed flat against his bosom. Cautiously, he asked, "How are you so certain he won't escape?" Hassen scratched at his rain-drenched hair, tangling it into a mess. "He was bold when he fought Huhulu. As those from Great Zhou say, he's skilled in the art of deception. He's the youngest son of the Prince of Libai, a wolf pup. If there's a chance to strike, he'll never choose to flee." He's bold indeed," Bayim said, "and cautious. Compared to his elder brother, Xiao Chuye is an impulsive man." Hassen grew a little embarrassed as he continued. "I'm no genius, but I know the pride of one. No matter how often he reminds himself to stay vigilant, he'll have lost some of his wariness after defeating our Huhulu at Third Sand Camp. His hunger is too strong, Bayim. Even I can feel it. Like my father, he won't allow himself to cower and retreat. This is his strength, but it is also his weakness." Bayim stroked his horse's neck. "Will we win?" "We will surely win." Hassen's eyes were bright, and his words were powerful. "He can't beat me." Hassen and Xiao Chuye had similar styles. The way they fought battles was wild and unrestrained. Qi Yin and Lu Guangbai had both been put through the ringer at this man's hands, but he and Xiao Chuye were polar opposites in personality. Hassen was introverted and even a little bashful. All the beautiful maidens of the 12 tribes had their eyes on him, yet a single glance from them would make him go red in the face. He was Amur's favorite son, not only by dint of the formidable blood of his mother's clan, but also his own character. Xiao Fangshi preferred raising his little wolves free range. He trained his sons with hard knocks until they howled in protest. Amur was the opposite. Before Hassen came of age, Amur had kept Hassen constantly by his side. He had personally taught Hassen how to fight in every one of his battles. "You're also a genius," Bayim added as an afterthought. Hassen shook his head and laughed aloud as he wiped his scimitar. "I'm not a genius, Bayim. I'm an ordinary man. I merely found my own path while battling geniuses. To be honest, before heading north, I worried over meeting Xiao Jiming here. Xiao Jiming and Qi Yin are the same kind of commander. They're more skilled at defense than offense. Do you understand? Not simple defense, mind you, but a kind that leaves you with no vulnerability to exploit and nowhere to turn. They're thorny opponents. Xiao Chuye isn't like that. He's..." Hassen struggled to find the appropriate description, then laughed instead. "I can't put my finger on it. He has plenty of shortcomings, and he isn't even trying to hide them. Then he's arrogant. Bayim nudged the horse over to Hassan's side. He raised a hand and lightly tapped Hassan's shoulder. "You're our new Esuhuri, the eagle of the desert, and the future husband of Dorlan. You can be as humble as you like, Hassan. In our eyes, you're a genius bestowed upon the Hanma tribe by the gods. You're inferior to no one." "Thank you," Hassan said. "My good friend, you should have come to my side earlier." They exchanged smiles. A series of urgent whistles resounded through the night. Hassan raised his face to the sky, and though it was no longer pouring as it had been during the day, a raindrop splashed between his brows. He gave his horse a pat, then looked west, past Tudalung Banner. "It's time we haul in the net." Hassan's elite forces hadn't entered the fray at all. The men he had sent to engage Xiao Chuye were all regular troops originally stationed east of Tudalung Banner. He had deployed another group to the eastern mountain range, where they had a firm grip on Zhao Hui, preventing him from providing reinforcements. All paths to the front line had been closed off. Hassen had turned the Tudalung Banner into an open sack and was only waiting to pull the cord closed around Xiao Chuye. He had no way out. Hassen had long prepared an elite force here in the east that was rested and raring to fight. Even if Xiao Chuye escaped tonight, Hassen would ride him down. The wolf pup, with his back exposed and vulnerable, would become their prey. This time, the sound of hooves was accompanied by torches that pressed in from the east. Exhausted, the Imperial army had no choice but to fall back. Although the rain had let up, the temperature had plummeted. Even Tantai Hu puffed warm breath into his frozen hands. Xiao Chuye trudged through the mud, the ragged breathing of his soldiers echoing behind him. They had to retreat to the marshland of Tudalung Banner as soon as possible. But Hassen wasn't going to miss this chance. His elite forces had eaten their fill during the day. Now, they spurred their horses onward, giving the Imperial army no time at all to retreat. Xiao Chuye had split his men into several smaller groups and hid them among the shrubs and grasses, but Hassan's scouts were meticulous, leaving no stone unturned. Gutin's keen ears quickly discerned more horses coming their way. Xiao Chuye raised an arm to wipe his cheek and looked back into the ebony night. Torches flared to life on the horizon. Hassan's riders were like a falcon circling ever lower. Now it spread its fiery wings and swooped down, screeching across the sky. "Master," Gutin said, leading his own horse out, "you should go. Mount up and head north." Xiao Chuye remained where he was. "Relay my orders along the way. Tell the men to withdraw back to the marshland. Find Tantai Hu. Tell him he's not to stick around. He needs to retreat immediately." The Biancha horsemen were closing in. Xiao Chuye could hear the sounds of horses snorting. When Gutin hesitated, Xiao Chuye spoke again with steady composure. "I have several hundred men here. We can fight as we retreat. We'll regroup in the marshland." At this point, Gutin knew Xiao Chuye wouldn't change his mind. He mounted his horse, and with a crack of his whip, charged into the night. Hassen had already seen the horse that mattered. The riders whistled, as though hunting wild beasts in the desert. They didn't rely on flags to convey messages. The whistle was taken up by others, echoing from the middle of their forces outward. On cue, both flanks wheeled their horses around to race toward the center, transforming the falcon with outspread wings into an arrow shooting straight for Xiao Chuye. In war, speed was everything. Hassen knew the consequences of hesitation. When it came to Xiao Chuye, he had to fight a quick battle. If he allowed his quarry to retreat to the marshland and catch his breath, Hassen very well might be facing another ambush. "That's him!" Bayim, just a step behind, pointed out a tall figure as he hollered in the Biancha tongue, "Xiao Chuye!" Hassen drew his scimitar and bent low over his horse. Even without Bayim's assistance, he had already recognized Xiao Chuye. The man's height and appearance were far too conspicuous, and the way he looked as he pressed his lips together and glared was identical to Xiao Fengshu. Wringing out the soaked strip of cloth, Xiao Chuye swiftly rewrapped it around his hand. He watched as the riders pressed in toward them, his attention entirely focused on Hassen's fiery hair. He calculated the distance quietly. Just as Hassen's horse reached the trip rope, Hassen suddenly twisted sideways, leaned down from the saddle, and sliced through the rope hidden among the grass with one smooth slash. The riders behind him dashed forward without obstruction. The galloping horsemen brandished their scimitars, but Xiao Chuye didn't move. In the blink of an eye, the hooves of the Biansha horses sank into the concealed pitfalls, sending several men tumbling off their horses. The men in the lead crashed to the ground, but Hassen, who rode at the back, seemed to have anticipated this. He'd hung back just a beat to test the lay of the land. Xiao Chuye raised a finger, and the imperial army jumped over the covering brush and broke into a dash. Hassen's horse snorted steam as its rider whistled again. These hastily dug pitfalls were too shallow. The enemy leapt over them to continue their pursuit. Their target was clear. Xiao Chuye. As long as Hassen killed Xiao Chuye, the scattered imperial army would be a mob without a leader. The grain wagons in the marshland of Tudalung Banner would be theirs for the taking. As Xiao Chuye trudged through the mud, a horse was already drawing up alongside him. The Biansha soldier barked something at him in his native tongue. Xiao Chuye dove forward, ducking under the scimitar scything toward him, and landed steadily on the ground. He twisted and sliced through the Biansha horseman's saddle. Frightened by the blade, the horse shied and stumbled. Xiao Chuye caught the arm of his pursuer. Instead of hacking it off, he yanked it hard. The rider tumbled off, sending up a spray of mud as Xiao Chuye jumped onto the horse's back. Sensing its change of master, the horse tossed its head wretchedly from side to side, dancing in place and refusing to run a step further. Hassen was pressing in close behind. Xiao Chuye squeezed hard with his legs and pulled on the reins, forcing the horse to barge ahead at an angle. Hassen had been too eager in his pursuit of Xiao Chuye. Muddy water flew up as the two horses collided. Wolf's Fang sliced through the air toward Hassen's chest with such ferocity that he didn't dare be strategic, desperately parrying the blow with all his strength. So heavy. Hassen's arm sank under the force of the blow, the scimitar almost slipping from his hand. Realizing how extraordinary Xiao Chuye's arm strength was, he avoided the edge of Xiao Chuye's blade and refrained from meeting him head-on. The riders behind them were gaining ground, clinging low to their horses' backs as they raced closer. The horse beneath Xiao Chuye stirred restlessly, and the pursuer's scimitar slashed at the horse's front knees. The horse screamed in pain as its legs buckled, collapsing into the mud. Xiao Chuye rolled off the horse. He was surrounded. The Biansha horsemen had formed a loose ring around Xiao Chuye. One of the fleeing Imperial Army soldiers cursed aloud. "Fuck me! The Supreme Commander fell off!" The stragglers from the Imperial Army who hadn't yet made it into the marsh promptly turned back, drew their blades, and charged into the horde of Biansha riders. They made quick use of the lesson. If they couldn't drag down the Biansha horsemen and leap onto their mounts, they would hack the horses' legs and send the Biansha horsemen plummeting to the ground. They remembered well what Xiao Chuye had said. The Biansha horsemen were not skilled at close-quarters melee on foot. But that was only true for the troops that crossed swords with the Libe armored cavalry in the north. Hassen had cut his teeth as a commander fighting battles with Great Zhou's finest infantry in the south. Lu Guangbai had clashed with him most often. And in fact, it was Lu Guangbai from whom all Xiao Chuye's knowledge of ambushing cavalries came. Hassen's elite forces weren't afraid of fighting on the ground. On the contrary, they were cool and determined as they faced the Imperial Army without their mounts. They needed no time to regroup. They lashed out again the instant they leapt to their feet. Fuck! The Imperial Army, yet to suffer a defeat since leaving Chengdu, sent up a collective curse. These fuckers are stronger than us. Chapter 153. Defeat. The Imperial Army was similar to Xiao Chuye, but much more slippery. There was a reason these soldiers gave the Libe armored cavalry complicated feelings. After the reign of Yongyi, their reputation had waned, and they had been reduced to mere ornaments in Chudu. Even their original patrol duties had been snatched away by the 8th Great Battalions. In the years that followed, they'd been relegated to odd jobs and idle errands without much protest, as if they were more than happy to drift their way through life. But since Xiao Chuye had taken charge, it was as if they'd been dusted off, finally able to shine in full glory in Chudu. Unlike the Libe armored cavalry and the Qidong garrison troops, the imperial army could disregard all other concerns and focus their attention solely on Xiao Chuye. Any criticism of their commander fell on deaf ears. So long as Xiao Chuye waved his hand and gave the signal, they were willing to follow him to hell and back. This was a brew of loyalty blended with the blood of brotherhood. The present moment was a prime example. The enemy undeniably outnumbered them, yet the imperial army felt no fear. They hacked at the legs of the enemy vanguard's horses to create an opening in Hassen's encirclement, but more troops followed, numerous and highly adaptable. Before Hassen gave a single command, they had already seen through the imperial army's intentions. Seeing the imperial army taking aim at the horses, the Biansha horsemen dismounted and charged in on foot. They wore no armor, and the furs they favored were light while repelling the chill. They moved with preternatural agility. Unlike Huhulu's squad, Hassen's men each had a spare scimitar tied to their saddles and slender pike daggers secured to the outside of their thighs. If they damaged their scimitars, they could grab their spare or draw their daggers for close quarters combat. They were a highly disciplined force. Xiao Chuye panted as he swept fierce eyes over the elite force arrayed before him. All this time, Hassen hadn't said a word. He had no need to intimidate or negotiate with Xiao Chuye, nor any desire to use him to threaten Xiao Fangshu. Leaving Xiao Chuye alive would open the door to future trouble. Xiao Chuye had to die. Tonight. Hassen locked eyes with his opponent. He gripped his scimitar with one hand and released the reins, then leapt off the horse and landed lightly in the mud. They were like beasts facing off in the night, their mutual abhorrence mixed with the stench of blood. Hassen approached steadily, wading through the muddy water without taking his eyes off Xiao Chuye. Sporadic raindrops splashed down from the dark sky onto the back of Xiao Chuye's hand as he gripped Wolf's Fang and watched Hassen draw closer. The silence was uncanny. The cacophony of battle was everywhere around them. Yet Xiao Chuye found it quiet. So quiet, it raised the hair on the back of his neck. It took everything he had to hold himself in check, suppressing that seething, murderous intent from rising up and overwhelming him. Hassen paused, as if he'd noticed Xiao Chuye's impatience. They were both fighting for control of the battlefield, attempting to influence its very atmosphere. Coexistence was impossible. Both craved absolute authority over the rhythm of this fight. A drop of moisture slid along the tensed muscle on the back of Xiao Chuye's hand. The moment it fell, Hassen burst into action. His red hair was a dancing torch in the darkness as he parted the mud underfoot, sprinting straight for Xiao Chuye. In a blink, Hassen's scimitar was slicing towards Xiao Chuye's throat. Xiao Chuye took a quick step back, the sludge fanning up behind him. He swung Wolf's Fang in a half-arc, and the two blades collided. Hassen skidded backward from the impact, but regained his footing almost immediately and lunged into action again, having cleverly learned to dodge this particular blade. Wolf's Fang was a heavy executioner's blade and relied on its wielder's extraordinary arm strength. Every move Hassen made was executed with the extension of hacking off Xiao Chuye's arm. Each time Xiao Chuye swung his blade, he struck empty air. Even when he caught up with Hassen, Hassen merely angled his scimitar and brushed past to avoid taking the brunt of Xiao Chuye's terrifying strength. As they fought, more attackers snuck up behind Xiao Chuye. He was pushing his senses to the limit, but his strength was depleting rapidly, like water pouring from a pierced vessel. In less than an hour, Xiao Chuye felt his own movement slowing. Hassen lunged again. At the same instant, Xiao Chuye felt a gust of wind at his back. He sidestepped to dodge a scimitar behind him, then grabbed the arm of the man wielding it. Spinning, he knocked Hassen to the ground with a kick as he snapped the arm of his second attacker. Another scimitar cleaved down on Xiao Chuye's arm from a new direction. There was a loud clang as the blade met the arm guard Shen Zichuan had gifted him. The slurry of mud erupted like the shrapnel from an explosion as more Biansha horsemen brought their scimitars down against Wolf's Fang. Xiao Chuye punched one of them into the mud with his free hand. The pressure on Wolf's Fang subsided, and Xiao Chuye crouched to support the lift of the blade. Hassen's scimitar had chipped from Wolf's Fang's impact. He dropped it and drew the pike daggers from the straps on his thighs, waiting for an opening. Just as he sprang forward, an Imperial Army soldier tackled Hassen around the waist. The soldier used his best wrestling technique but failed to trip Hassen. Hassen flipped the dagger and slid it along the man's armor, plunging it viciously into the side of his neck. Blood spurted like a mountain spring. Yet Hassen hadn't even pulled the dagger out when he had to turn his head to dodge Xiao Chuye's blade. Men were dying on both sides. The Imperial Army hadn't been prepared for Hassen's elite force to be this formidable. Likewise, Hassen's cavalry hadn't expected the Imperial Army to put up such a fight. The Biansha horsemen at the periphery produced iron chains with small copper balls attached to the ends. They were similar in appearance to those used by the Libe armored cavalry, but much lighter. They inched closer, tightening the encirclement. The next time Xiao Chuye's Wolf's Fang faltered, countless chains shot toward him. The copper balls wrapped around every one of Xiao Chuye's limbs. With their prey firmly caught in the web, the horsemen yanked him onto the muddy ground. Hassen's dagger whistled toward Xiao Chuye's face. It took practically all his strength to drag his chain-wrapped arms up to parry the blow. The Biansha horsemen at the other end of the chains all stumbled in unison. Once again, the dagger slammed into the arm guard with a clang. Even a piece of top-quality iron like this one couldn't withstand the successive blows. Xiao Chuye felt the dog hide string snap. The arm guard dented beyond repair. He fought against the chains, but there were simply too many. He tilted his head to spit out the mud and sand in his mouth, watching the scimitar slice toward his throat. He saw the billowing black sky. The winds of the Hongyan Mountains tousled his rain-drenched hair, and between ragged gasps, he thought of Shen Zichuan. Victory was within Hassen's grasp, but he never expected Xiao Chuye to resist the combined force of so many trying to hold him down. Xiao Chuye raised both legs and kicked over a blade-wielding Biansha soldier. The iron chains securing him swung violently. It was impossible to tell if it was sweat or muddy water that trickled along his temples. Blue veins protruded as Xiao Chuye flipped himself up and landed on his feet. But one person alone could not salvage the situation, just as a single log couldn't support a collapsing building. The instant Xiao Chuye found his balance, the soldiers yanked the chains taut. He was once again dragged to the ground. Even if he'd been blessed with wings, escape would be impossible tonight. Below him, the ground started to quake. Water droplets clinging to the shrubs and branches jumped as the call of a war horn reverberated through the boundless night. Hassen looked southward. He was scarcely surprised to see a figure in dark armor charging toward them at a thunderous speed. A black tide followed at his heels, engulfing everything in its path under the crushing darkness of the night. The closer they came, the more aggressively the ground jolted under that roar of hooves, a testament to the heavy weight of their steel armor. Hassen whistled. Immediately, his men swung astride their horses and withdrew northward in an orderly fashion. Before he turned his own horse, Hassen glanced toward Xiao Chuye once more with regret. He raised 2 fingers, tapped his temple, and inclined his head as if to bid him a polite farewell. He put his heels to his horse and sped away, leaving a scene of devastation in his wake. The black-armored rider galloped to Xiao Chuye's side, making a tight circle around him before removing his helmet. Xiao Fengshu looked askance at Xiao Chuye, then commanded those behind him. "Untie your second young master. How unsightly." The expression in Xiao Chuye's eyes was bitterly cold and grave. It was the shame of his first taste of defeat. First Sand Camp was divided into 5 divisions commanded by 5 generals, all of whom reported to Xiao Fengshu. In military terms, Xiao Chuye not only ranked below all of them, but had been pathetically defeated. As he squatted outside the tent to rinse his upper body with cold water, the commanding generals all glanced at him as they came and went. Xiao Chuye didn't seem to feel the blade wounds on his shoulders, chest, and back as the frigid water washed his body pale. When the meeting inside the tent adjourned, Zuo Qianqiu lifted the flap. Spotting Xiao Chuye hunched nearby with his back to them all, his intended reproach disappeared beneath bemusement and sympathy. He called out, "Come in and drink a bowl of warm milk. It's freezing out. We can't have you falling sick." Mumbling in answer, Xiao Chuye rose to return the water bucket before stepping into the tent. A fire was crackling inside. Xiao Chuye's armor had been so badly damaged it could no longer be worn. Xiao Fengshu was presently examining the dent in the steel of his arm guard. Zuo Qianqiu had called for a medic to dress Xiao Chuye's wounds, so Xiao Chuye sat bare-chested on the little stool and held himself still. A short time later, Chunyang, Gujin, Tantai Hu, and Wu Ziyu filed in. Xiao Fengshu tossed the arm guard onto the table, settled himself in the commander's seat, and addressed Chunyang. "Give your general a report of the casualties." "The Imperial Army lost 300 men," Chunyang began quietly. "Louder." Xiao Fengshu fixed his gaze on Chunyang. "Why are you hanging your head?" Chunyang raised his voice. "The Imperial Army lost 300 men. 36 sustained severe injuries, and 8 had minor injuries." Xiao Chuye's roots lay in the Imperial Army. He was responsible for every one of its casualties, fatal or otherwise. This army, so far from its origins, could not be further expanded. It was a distinctive force. Should this force be wiped out, there was no way to rebuild it in Libei. With every defeat the Imperial Army suffered in battle, its losses were exponential. 300 soldiers were a drop in the bucket to the Qidong garrison troops or the Libei armored cavalry, but they were a heavy blow to the Imperial Army. Silence fell over the tent. Tantai Hu snuck a few glances at Chunyang and Gujin before finally plucking up his courage to speak. "Hassen caught us off guard. Master was also... Now report the casualties of the 3 great battalions of Liuyang to your general," Xiao Fengshu ordered as if he hadn't heard. Chunyang paused, then said, "The Liuyang battalions dispatched along the southern route lost 892 men. 45 sustained heavy injuries, and 237 suffered light injuries. Zhao Hui has been fighting on the northern route. He assembled this squad at the last minute to aid your Imperial Army. The group numbered 2,000 in total. They were ambushed by the cavalry Hassen stationed along their route while digging out the collapsed bridle path. Almost half of them died there. If you had stayed where you were," Xiao Fengshu continued, "you would have met them in just under 4 hours. But you impulsively turned around and made for Tudalung Banner. How are you going to account for this loss to Zhao Hui?" Xiao Chuye was silent. "You were the commanding general in charge of the transportation of supplies, not a commanding general who rides into combat. To think you'd launch an assault on Hassan's squad with only a few hundred men. Did a donkey kick you in the head, Xiao Chuye?" It wasn't Zuo Qianqiu's place to speak, but Xiao Chuye had just come off the battlefield. As his shifu, he couldn't help but feel bad for his disciple. Hassan's been planning this for a long time, and they didn't anticipate the storm. It was an urgent situation. You don't see the Libei armored cavalry as your responsibility at all. In your eyes, there's only the Imperial Army." Bracing his hand on his knees, Xiao Fengshu leaned forward, his voice suddenly frigid. "The earlier victory went to your head. Now you think every opponent is like Huhulu. Your loss to Hassen today is the consequence. What possessed you to think you could fight him head on? Raise your head." Wu Ziyu couldn't bear it any longer and dropped to his knees with a thud. Once he was down, Tan Tai-hu cluelessly followed. 2 more thuds followed. Chun Yang and Gu Jin had knelt too. Xiao Fangshu turned to level his gaze on them. "Your lordship," Wu Ziyu said weakly. It's just... my leg suddenly gave out." What? Chapter 154. A Man. Xiao Chuye's private scolding would be followed by public discipline the next day. He had been demoted below the rank of primary commander. So what if he was an extraordinary prodigy? Even he had to swallow his pride after suffering a defeat. It was said one should never brag in a war zone about battles once fought or enemies once vanquished. None of that mattered. Xiao Chuye had slain Hu Hulu at Third Sand Camp, something that had been the subject of intense discussion in the army, but Xiao Fangshu hadn't rewarded him. Instead, he'd made his son the general in charge of the military supplies. Perhaps others hadn't understood this move, but the older generals had seen it at once. Xiao Fangshu planned to entrust his son with heavy responsibilities. Xiao Fangshu had chosen not to reward Xiao Chuye because he wanted to quiet the dissenting voices whispering behind their backs. He wanted to prove he was even harsher and more exacting on his son than on others. Although Guo Weili had won few victories against Hu Hulu the whole time he'd fought him in Tudalung Banner, Xiao Fangshu promoted him and transferred his troops to Third Sand Camp to take up command. Upon seeing such a stark contrast in treatment, anyone with a brain would know to shut up. It signaled that any promotion Xiao Chuye received in the future would be based on genuine military achievement, and it also left Xiao Chuye room for defeat. It wasn't that Li Bei could not afford to lose a battle. Xiao Jiming could lose, Guo Weili could, and so could Zhao Hui. But these were all generals familiar to Li Bei. Their defeats were pardonable. Xiao Chuye didn't have the luxury of such forgiveness. Once he truly came to stand at the forefront of the war, he could only win. He had to prove to the dispirited armored cavalry that there was no other candidate for Li Bei. Xiao Chuye walked out of the main tent and put on his clothes. His lower back and torso were swathed in bandages, but his right arm had sustained the worst injury. He wouldn't be able to draw the conqueror bow for some time. He'd even have to exercise caution wielding Wolf's Fang. He huffed out a few clouds of hot air and whistled for Snowcrest. The horse had just been brushed down and had yet to be saddled. Xiao Chuye vaulted atop its back and gave it a pat on the neck, then leaned down to whisper a few words into the animal's ear. Snowcrest turned and obediently galloped away into the night. "He's still just the same," Zuo Qianqiu lamented at the entrance of the tent. "Every time he's feeling down, he goes riding." "He's seething." Xiao Fangshu lifted the pot of boiling tea. His 6 years in Chudu weren't in vain. "If this was before, I wouldn't put it past him to fling aside the tent flap and storm off when I scolded him the second time. No one can beat those old foxes in Chudu when it comes to tempering a man. We shouldn't pin all the blame for this loss on him." Zuo Qianqiu looked back at the Prince of Li Bei. "Hassen took great care setting the trap in Tudalung Banner. If it had been either of us, even we might not have escaped unscathed. There's no such thing as if in war. It was his battle, and the outcome is his to bear, win or lose." Xiao Fangshu paused. There was no question that the battle would be a loss. But I'm happy he dared to turn back to the marshlands of Tudalung Banner to outflank them and fight. "Right?" Zuo Qianqiu laughed and pointed a finger at Xiao Fangshu. "It's just like you to say one thing and mean another." "I can't praise him," Xiao Fangshu said, rotating his teacup. "You never held back your praise for Jiming." "It's different." Xiao Fangshu turned to face him. "Jiming takes after his mother. After his little brother came along, he heard everyone say how much Aye resembled his father, as if he'd snatched Aye's place by being born a few years earlier. Because of this, I must praise Jiming often. Aye takes after me," he continued. "What's more, he's the baby of the family. With Jiming shielding him, he's always done whatever he pleased. He was 13 when he almost broke his neck falling off his horse trying to tame it, and the moment he recovered, he carried on even if he had to sneak out to do it. When he was 14, he fought a beautifully executed battle. There wasn't a person who didn't praise him when he returned to the homeland. Back then, he wouldn't let anyone give him what he wanted. He had to obtain it on his own, even if he starved, even if he thirsted. With a personality like that, what he lacks is not praise, but criticism. Being a father is a skill. I can't compare to you. Zhuo Qianqiu's wife had died young. After the Battle of Tianfei Watchtower, he had wandered all over Great Zhou and never remarried. He had no children. He sat down and continued. But there's been no lack of talented men from Biansha in recent years. Amur was a formidable son, too. Hassen is neither arrogant nor rash, and he's decisive and straightforward in his moves. Amur has a good eye. Xiao Fangshu took a sip of hot tea. The most impressive thing about Hassen is he doesn't confine himself to one style of battle, yet his character is steady. If Jiming were deployed here, Zhuo Qianqiu said, he could probably hold him in check. Maybe so. Xiao Fangshu shifted his feet slightly. Zhao Hui's combat style bears the closest resemblance to Jiming's. Zhao Hui learned from him, after all. But back when Hassen fought Qidong, he faced Qi Juyin, whose tactical sense is similar to Jiming's. Hassen is accustomed to that kind of rhythm. Look at Zhao Hui. He was able to contain Hassen's onslaught, yes, but he was pinned down by Hassen on the northern route all the same. Zhuo Qianqiu laughed. But when Hassen faced Aya, he was one fearsome force against another. If their numbers were equally matched, I think both sides would have suffered comparable losses. Don't flatter him. He's no match for Hassen as he is. Hassen has been on the battlefield even longer than Jiming, and experience is far more formidable than natural talent. Aya is still at a great disadvantage. Xiao Fangshu stood, spinning a dagger between his fingers as he stared at the woven straw target across from him. The wolf pup can't win. Zhuo Qianqiu clasped his hands behind his back and said, placid, General in charge of military supplies is a good post. Once he has a thorough grasp of his duties, he'll know all of Li Bei's major and minor military routes, the strengths and weaknesses of the various camps, and even the personalities of the generals commanding them like the back of his hand. Xiao Fangshu threw the dagger with a quick flick of his wrist. It buried itself in the bullseye. He looked back at Zhuo Qianqiu and laughed smugly. I'm going to send Amur a gift. Let's give him a taste of what I can do. Xiao Chuye returned near dawn. Chunyang came forward to hand him a handkerchief as he dismounted. Xiao Chuye wiped the sweat on his neck and spied Xiao Fangshu standing a short distance away, beckoning him over. He considered pretending not to see him. Not to be denied, Xiao Fangshu strode over and looped an arm around Xiao Chuye's neck, forcing Xiao Chuye to bend down, then tousled Xiao Chuye's hair until it was a mess. Where's my falcon? Xiao Chuye extricated himself with difficulty and rubbed at his neck. Don't feed it raw meat. It's your falcon. What are you asking me for? Xiao Fangshu took a few steps forward. Seeing that Xiao Chuye was still unhappy, he turned and lifted a leg to kick him. Xiao Chuye leapt away. I'm just asking. Xiao Fangshu ignored him and stroked Snowcrest. We had a new herd of horses back home last year. There's one with coloring just the reverse of this one, white with a black pouch on his chest. A real beauty. Oh, said Xiao Chuye, guessing his intent. Are you giving it to me? Xiao Fangshu slanted him a look. Giving it to you? Your elder sister-in-law is putting it aside for your wife. Xiao Chuye trained his eyes on the Hongyan Mountains behind him and said nothing. That's a nice arm guard. Xiao Fangshu stepped up on the wooden fence and took a seat. When Xiao Chuye looked back, his father craned his neck, peering at Xiao Chuye's expression. Where was it forged? It's not in Qidong style. Of course it's nice. Xiao Chuye turned away and said, as if telling a secret, That's my protective charm. Xiao Fangshu hummed but didn't let up. Where's this girl from? Don't tell me you left her in border camp. It's full of stinky men. How old is she? Stinky men? Xiao Chuye asked. Xiao Fengshu looked on quizzically as Xiao Chuye took a few steps back. Xiao Fengshu narrowed his eyes. Don't tell me you brought back a girl from the Hua clan. Xiao Chuye That's funny. Xiao Chuye continued to retreat. At his father's puzzled expression, he let out an inexplicable laugh. He removed Wolf's Fang and tossed it aside. Xiao Chuye. Xiao Fengshu sensed something amiss. Fess up. Xiao Fengshu suddenly raised his voice. It's a stinky man. Huh? Xiao Fengshu cocked his head, thinking he'd misheard. I'm bringing home a man. Sunlight shone on Xiao Chuye's face, dispelling the dark clouds of yesterday. He was a perfect little rascal as he taunted. The best-looking man of all of Great Zhou is my wife. After making this proclamation, he didn't even wait for Xiao Fengshu's reaction before turning around and taking to his heels. Xiao Fengshu. Oh my gosh. Xiao Fengshu. Let me get it together. Xiao Fengshu lapsed into silence. Chunyang swallowed nervously. Suddenly, he saw Xiao Fengshu leap off the fence, half falling over himself as he landed. Chunyang. I'm so sorry. Chunyang called out, My lord, Xiao Chuye. Xiao Fengshu let out an earth-shaking roar. He pushed himself off the ground to chase after his son, but stopped after a few steps, knowing he couldn't catch up. In a fit of anger, he picked up a piece of dried horse dung and flung it after him, cussing. Get your ass back here and make yourself clear. Chapter 155. Negotiations. Xiao Chuye was not only scolded, he received a few harsh thumps from his father as well. But he'd been thinking it over for a long time and didn't want to hide it from his family. Later, he stood inside the main tent to accept his official punishment of demotion. Before the commanding generals withdrew, they snuck a glance at the prince and were surprised to find him even angrier than before. Zhuo Qianqiu studied the arm guard, turning it over and over in his hands, then gave Xiao Fengshu a slight thumbs up. Huh, I certainly can't tell anything from this. Xiao Fengshu stood at the other end of the tent with his back to his son. You think I don't know what kind of arm guard he uses? It'd be boiled dog hide at most. He thinks his skin is thick enough. He'd never put thought into something like this. Zhuo Qianqiu was also put on the spot as he glanced at Xiao Chuye and said hesitantly, why didn't you mention this to us when you were in Chudu? Come, tell Shifu about him so we can prepare ourselves a little. Prepare my ass. Xiao Fengshu looked back. He had it all figured out. He was just waiting for me to take the bait. He's so pissed. You'll have to meet him sooner or later. Xiao Chuye accepted the rebuke with his hands behind his back. I'll do everything properly. I want to take him home to see Mom this year. You have the whole thing arranged already, huh? Xiao Fengshu's words were loaded with sarcasm. Maybe I should start calling you old man. Xiao Chuye didn't dare reply. Where's he from? Zhuo Qianqiu set down the arm guard. Chudu? Xiao Chuye answered honestly. Zhongbo. That's not too bad. It's close by, Zhuo Qianqiu commented to Xiao Fengshu. He followed up with another question. How old? 21. Pretty young. Zhuo Qianqiu found this description oddly familiar, but he couldn't put his finger on why. He continued his questioning. This arm guard of yours is well made. Is he a craftsman or armorer? No. Xiao Fengshu sneered. Do you dare repeat what you said outside to your Shifu? Turning aside, Xiao Chuye gave a slight cough. I demoted you, so you stabbed me in the heart. Sorry, Xiao Chuye cried. Xiao Fengshu cried. I'm gonna read that again. I demoted you, so you stabbed me in the heart, Xiao Fengchu cried. Xiao Chuye found these words uncomfortably familiar. Not falling for it, he said, I didn't. I wouldn't dare. Zuo Tianqiu was still caught up in wondering what kind of person this young man was. What's his name, then? Is he from a clan we're familiar with? Yes. Xiao Chuye paused for a moment, then answered. His name is Shen Zichuan. Several days later. Oh, just give me a second. Several days later, Kong Ling and Yu Xiaozai arrived at Luoxia Pass to discuss a long-term partnership on behalf of Zizhou, though both parties had more or less already reached an agreement through their written correspondence. In addition, they requested direct passage through, hoping to arrive at Huaizhou before the end of the 8th month. The 8th month had only just begun when the commander of Fanzhou's garrison troops revolted, intending to proclaim himself king of the prefecture. He deployed troops to seize Dengzhou first, planning to use the opportunity to threaten Zizhou. To top it off, he wrote to Zhou Gui and demanded that Zizhou hand the grain they sold to Chazhou over to them instead, claiming it as a loan. Shen Zichuan, of course, ignored him. He instructed Zhou Gui to draft an official denunciation as well as a declaration that he would suppress any bandits in the region, then had it dispatched to Chazhou. Slapping the label of bandit on all armed groups in Zhongbo with the important exception of himself, he declared Suzhou's intention to join forces with Chazhou to eradicate the outlaws. The self-styled King Yi of Fanzhou naturally refused to accept this, and the two parties hurled abuse at each other from afar. Their respective advisors traded letters conveying rude greetings to each other's ancestors, sparing no effort to make the other side out as treacherous rebels while painting themselves as a reluctant militia revolting against corrupt forces for the sake of the common man. Throughout the standoff, Shen Zichuan never idled. Time was precious. Between the exchange of abuses, he ordered the Zizhou prefectural yamen to start repairing the roads and relay stations leading to the other prefectures. This was no small undertaking and would likely only be completed by the end of the year. At the same time, Zizhou's garrison troops pushed ahead with their training. The prefecture was now expanding at full speed. Apart from what's needed to buy grain from Huaizhou, Zhou Gui explained when they met in his study, the profits from the sale of grain this year will be enough to repair the roads, but the prefectural yamen will have less grain to distribute to those in need. Winter is coming. I don't want the heart to turn away the migrants, and they're increasing every day. He produced a slim book and presented it to Shen Zichuan. Now that the weather's getting colder, most of the new migrants are coming from Dancheng. Speaking of migrants from Dancheng, taking hold of the book, Shen Zichuan turned to Yao Wenyu. Yuan Zhuo came through Dancheng. He knows more about the situation there than us. Why are so many people leaving their homes? Tugging on the coat draped over his shoulders, Yao Wenyu answered gravely. After the late emperor passed, Han Cheng tried to convince the Empress Dowager to create more official positions for the descendants of the noble clans. Essentially, they hoped to raise these noble sons using the funds of the state treasury. The list comprised over 10,000 people. Obviously, the Empress Dowager didn't agree. To shore up their strength, the noble clans became even more aggressive in seizing the commoners' fields. They underreported acreages, keeping vast expanses of fertile farmland off the books. Not only did this leave the common people without fields to farm, they still had to pay a head tax for every family member. Many of them couldn't make a living, so they fled. According to the law, once their household registration is confirmed, those who leave without appropriate documentation from local authorities can be arrested and drafted into the army. Or worse, executed. Shen Zichuan thought for a moment. If they hope to escape the authorities in Dancheng, fleeing to Zhongbo is the best option. But even Suzhou has a limited capacity. Relying on the yamen to give out free grain isn't viable in the long run. We simply can't afford to feed this many mouths. And that wasn't the only problem. A portion of the migrants who had come to Suzhou had gotten used to getting their meals for nothing. They made excuses to avoid registering themselves with the authorities, instead maintaining the status of migrant in order to freeload off the city and idle their lives away outside the prefectural yamen. I made a special point of asking the census officials at the yamen, Jogwei supplied. There are many young and strong people among these folks who loiter on the streets stirring up trouble. There was good public order in the city before the 7th month, but since the beginning of the 8th, theft has become increasingly common. When the constables arrest them and march them to jail, they make a huge scene. Jogwei fretted, heavy with worries. But after they learned they could still feel their stomachs even in jail, they became more brazen. Alas, Shunzi Chuan had already come to a decision on this matter. The dauntless behavior is enabled by Cizhou's accommodating and magnanimous treatment toward migrants and lack of relevant penalties established. Cizhou has continued treating them as local citizens of decent origins. But times are different now. Today, I'd like to ask you to draft a document strictly forbidding migrants from delaying their registration. By the middle of the 8th month at the very latest, anyone who has not registered themselves at the prefectural yamen will be driven out without exception. That's not all. You will put up notices everywhere tomorrow and assign clerks to explain. Make sure to clarify to the commoners who cannot read so they know what is at stake. Starting the day after tomorrow, any violators and offenders shall be dealt with severely, without mercy. Shunzi Chuan had always used a gentle touch since arriving in Cizhou, and he always appeared amicable and easygoing to outsiders. He never flaunted his talents openly, even during the thorny negotiations of the Chazhou grain deal. This order was a clear departure from his usual style. Suddenly, he appeared swift and decisive. But, Jogwei began, won't we lose the support of the people if the punishments are too severe? After all, it was only a few months ago that Cizhou started accepting the migrants with open arms. These are two separate matters. Yao Wenyu had timed his support perfectly. Cizhou welcomes those in need out of compassion, but if we let our authority be undermined because of this, we'll be sabotaging ourselves. As they say, before dealing with external foes, one must first resolve internal conflicts. Cizhou must eradicate these threats at home as soon as possible, otherwise they will burden us in the future. Fanzhou already has King Yi. Shunzi Chuan set the book down. He wants to establish a miniature imperial court southeast of Cizhou. He's assembled troops from Fanzhou and Dengzhou, and he's positioning them to attack Cizhou so he can turn us into his personal granary. Next year, the situation will be more chaotic. We can't afford to make any more concessions for the sake of benevolence. Besides, this is a good thing, Yao Wenyu told Jogwei. Repairing the roads and relay stations requires manpower we don't have. The migrants can fill these vacancies in Cizhou. If the yamen distributes grain to them in accordance with work done, they'll have both work to occupy their hands and food to fill their stomachs. They'll no longer go around stirring up trouble. Jogwei nodded. Once the household registration is complete, the yamen will have an exact head count of the people in Cizhou. If we start surveying fields at the end of the 8th month, we should be able to finish dividing the farmlands before spring. As long as we encounter no natural disaster this year, Cizhou's granary will remain full. And this is only the first year. Shunzi Chuan was in a good mood. Chazhou will also be on the agenda next year. We should also prepare to open up a new road to northwest, to Luoxia and Huaizhou. Isn't Li Bei letting us use their roads? Jogwei asked, taken aback. They are, but in the long run, we'll still have to remunerate Luoxia Pass for their use, Shunzi Chuan said. The pass is directly north of Quanchang. They're allies we need to befriend. Once the trade route begins to thrive and benefits the surrounding regions, the present roads will be insufficient. What's more, the Beiyuan hunting grounds will become the Imperial Army's permanent encampment, so establishing roads for their use is imperative. There's also the issue of army provisions for the other regions in early spring next year. The weather had taken a turn, and Yao Wenyu's legs were aching, but he looked as composed as ever. Firstly, Qidong is the biggest threat south of Zhongbua. This year, they were affected by the late emperor's assassination and Lu Guangbai's desertion. They didn't manage to send troops to Zhongbua, But now the marriage alliance between Hua and Qi is sealed. If they have sufficient provisions this spring, we can expect them to send troops north to crush us. As for Li Bei, now that it's broken free of Chudu's control, they no longer have access to Juexi's granaries via the northeast provisions trail. Li Bei shares a common lot with us, and they're shouldering the burden of driving back Biansha in the north. The issue of provisions for them must be resolved before spring as well. The rest of Zhou Gui's advisors held their discussion in a partitioned area of the study, separated from Shen Zichuan and the prefect by a folding screen. As they spent most of their time shut up indoors, and with so many pipe smokers among them, the study grew stuffier the longer they sat. Calling out to Qiao Tianya, Shen Zichuan said, "Help Yuan Zhuo out for some fresh air." Yao Wenyu inclined his head in a slight bow to Shen Zichuan from his wheelchair and let Qiao Tianya push him out. Shen Zichuan instructed Zhou Gui to open the windows and let the advisors in the partitioned area take a break. Leaving the turbid air of the room inside, Shen Zichuan too headed out into the chill wind. Zizhou had entered its rainy season. Sunny days were few and far between, and the weather was bitterly cold. Ji Gang, worried Shen Zichuan would fall ill again, was particularly cautious with his health and watched him every day to ensure he put on extra layers. He tasked Fei Sheng with following him around whenever he headed out. The moment Fei Sheng saw Shen Zichuan step into the wind, he went over to hand him a coat. Shen Zichuan draped it over his shoulders and strolled down the covered walkway. The flowers of the pagoda trees in this courtyard had long withered, and the leaves on the branches had fallen, leaving bare trees set against a backdrop of gloomy skies, a picture of desolation. Thinking to amuse him, Fei Sheng said, "Master, there's a copper basin in the Zhou Manor that's the spitting image of ours. There are a few brocade carp in it, and Mr. Yao's cat was so hungry watching them it was spinning in circles." Shen Zichuan glanced over. "That's because the one in our residence was a housewarming gift from Madame Zhou." He felt a little chilly standing there, but the cold had cleared his head. Seeing it was about time, he drifted back under the eaves of the study. Qiao Tianya and Yao Wenyu had yet to return, so he waited for a while longer. Eventually, Zhou Gui rushed over, gesturing for Shen Zichuan to enter. Evening was fast approaching, and they should soon retire. The advisors would work through the night drafting the new documents, and Shen Zichuan would need to wake at the crack of dawn the next morning to return and review the finer details with everyone. It would be a race against time to get the notice up before midday the day after tomorrow. Once winter comes, we'll need to take advantage of Li Bei's trade market. Shen Zichuan stood by the door, conversing with Zhou Gui. "We'll negotiate with the Yan clan if we can, but if we can't, forget it. When the time comes, we can take a longer route to Juexi from Huaizhou. Although it's a fair distance, perhaps we can think of a way to use the Hua clan's waterways in Dicheng. The army provisions will also..." Shen Zichuan broke off when he saw Ding Tao enter from the courtyard entrance and leap over the railing in a few strides. He signaled for Ding Tao to speak. Ding Tao's cheeks were flushed pink as he exclaimed, "Gongzi, the heir consort is here." Alrighty, everyone, that concludes the reading for today. Hope you all enjoyed these chapters. I'm going to go over some of my notes because, oh my gosh. So first off, I just want to start by saying, when we go all the way back, right, we have this scenario where basically it's too difficult for the Imperial Army and the Li Bei Armored Cavalry people that are with them that handle provisions. It's too difficult for them to like carry the provisions because they're so heavy and fight as well. And so, of course, Wu Ziyu's original thought process was, okay, we just have to abandon these goods basically and get ourselves to safety. Meanwhile, Xiao Triya was like, nah, bruh, let's hide them. Let's hide them in a spot that's difficult for everyone to maneuver in, the Tudalung Banner, right? And so that's what they end up doing. It's freezing cold, you know, it's raining because it's always raining in QJJ. Like, rain is the plot, okay? And so the Biansha horsemen, they come, but he's got everyone spread out and just like tackling in the shadows, taking advantage of the environment, the rain and everything. And they're seeming to go really well at having a great advantage and everything. And, they seem to be winning. Only for Xiao Chuye to realize after Gujin reports that no, he's fallen into Hassen's trap. And the thing is, Hassen is a different animal, same beast. I think it was Kanye West that said that. But they are the same in certain ways as far as how they fight and everything. They're both beastly men, right? And so Xiao Chuye had been trying to read the situation, since Hu Halu's situation. And meanwhile, Hassen's been observing him. And then even once they finally come face to face, like as Hassen and his men are approaching, they're still like reading each other. It was a pretty intense battle. I ain't even gonna lie, I was sick. I was like, whoa, I would love to see this fight scene. And so then, of course, Xiao Chuye already knew that they would lose their advantage once the rain let up and everything. Of course, that all was squashed after he realized they were in a trap. But it got to a point where it was like, there's only so much that the Imperial Army could do, right? And it's to the point they got chains around my baby, okay? Chains around him. And like, he thinks of Shen Zichuan, which gives him like an extra burst. He's like, no, I'm finna win. I'm finna fight these chains, basically, even though it's pretty much the end. Like, this would have been it. But he is saved by Daddy Xiao. And I was very happy. I was like, thank you, Daddy. Thank you for coming onto the scene. But it also just really sucked because, of course, the Biansha horsemen and Hassen, they fled. But this was Xiao Tzu'an's first taste of defeat. It did not taste good at all. And so, of course, he got a scolding from his father. It's like, what the hell do you think you were doing? If you had stayed where I told you to stay, then within this certain amount of time, then da-da-da-da-da, but you had to go off and fight, like what you think. I was like, man, he is laying it in on Xiao Chuye, but I can't be mad at him. Do what you do, Daddy. And so then when we get to the next chapter, a man, basically, at the end of the opening chapter, it says Xiao Fengxue had planned to entrust his son with heavy responsibilities. And honestly, when I had read initially that he put Xiao Chuye over the provisions and everything, my brain was already thinking that, because there's a saying we have here. I don't know if it's everywhere else, but basically, if I can trust you with a little, then I can trust you with a lot, which, don't get me wrong, that little was actually a very important role, regardless of how others may have treated them as far as people who took care of transporting provisions. Like, you wouldn't be nothing without these provisions, okay? You wouldn't be anything. But anyway, he's like, if I can trust you with a little, I can trust you with a lot. And ultimately, Xiao Chuye's actions were kind of like, not the best decision. Even though in the end, he still ended up being like proud of his son for still, instead of retreating, being like, nah, let's face these mofos. And so it was just interesting to see Daddy Xiao and Zuo Qianqiu have a conversation. And basically, Zuo Qianqiu was like, well, you ain't praising your son. You saying one thing to him and then saying another, when he's gone. And why aren't you praising your son? And I love how basically Xiao Fengxue is so aware. So many parents aren't aware. They raise all of their kids the same, even though, they just kind of get more lax as, the middle child comes, the last child. But as far as like fundamental things, they don't change the way they do things sometimes. But he's like, no, I know that Xiao Jiming needs this kind of upbringing, this kind of raising based on what I've observed, and my Zi'an needs this kind. And so it was just very nice to see that he knew that his children needed to be raised differently because they acted differently, And then, of course, when we move forward, that confession, all from this arm guard. He's like, where you get this arm guard from? Who's the special lady? Did you leave her back there with them stinky men? And he was like, it is a stinky man. I honestly didn't know how to record that part. It was crazy. But I was like, oh my gosh, he just told his dad that he's in love with a man and then ran off like a blushing schoolboy. Also, we find out specifically that Xiao Chuye is 21 years old. So anyway, that was really funny. terribly hilarious. And then even more so, his dad is going off again. He was like, so you just been planning all of this stuff. You just been hiding it for a while and you ain't said nothing to me. He's like, oh, you got demoted. I demoted you. So you want to break my heart, son? Which I was just like, you'll be okay, daddy. You'll be okay. But I was waiting for that moment when he says that it was Shan Zituen. But of course, it switched to the next scene. But let me go back to that page because I'm just like, what would have been the I want to know what was the reaction after he was like, his name is Shan Zituen. Like, can I just be in the tent for that scene? Like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But anyway, we move forward and we get back to Tsujo, right? And fortunately, they have successfully made an agreement with Luo Xiao Pass to use them as, a means to transport goods and everything. But then we got a problem with Fanzhou. And this, King Yi or whatever, trying to rebel and trying to force them to hand over their grain and everything. And they're going back and forth, throwing insults at each other, basically. That's just the simplest thing. I think the most important thing to take away from this without getting into the nitty gritty of the details. And so, yeah, they're not giving in. But then we also have this other issue. Like, it's like there was one issue, of the bandits, right? And that's not fully taken care of, I don't think, but mostly taken care of for the time being. But now there's the issue of these migrants who are freeloading. And I totally understand Shan Zituen, because Zhou Gui, he has a good heart and he wants to feed everybody. But Shan Zituen is like, hey, you can't. It's impossible. We don't even have enough to feed everybody. And these people, these migrants, like not saying it's all of them, but they're taking advantage of your benevolence, taking advantage of your kindness and freeloading off of you, refusing to do what they know that they are required to do. So here is what we are going to do. And I love it. Even the fact that he was like, and this new thing that we're doing, like they have to be registered by this point in time. Let's go ahead and have some people out there explaining it to those who can't read. I was like, Shan Zituen, you are really, this is why I love you, okay? This is why I love you so much, Lanzhou, because you're just awesome, So anyway, they're working on repairing the roads and the relay stations. And he's like, these guys, these migrants, they can work. They earn their keep, basically. Handle all of that, okay? If they want some food, then they won't be causing such a fuss anymore. It's like even the people, they're like being brazen and causing fusses because they know if they go to jail, they'll be fed, which is kind of how it is in reality sometimes. But okay, we digress. We're not going down that route. Anyway, so they're making these, road repairs and relay stations because at some point they are going to have to, pay back Luo Xiao Pass for, this deal and everything. And the goal is, to open up these trade routes and to just be using these trades successfully between different areas, blah, blah, snore. Basically, that's the end of that. And then we get to the end of the chapter, negotiations, where the heir consort is here. The heir consort. Alrighty then. So, I hope y'all are ready for the next chapters. Once we get there, this was exciting. I even read one extra chapter than I intended because the chapter before that, I was like, no, I think I can go one more. And I did. And boy, am I glad I did. So I hope y'all enjoyed these chapters. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comment section. I can't wait to engage with you all and have a wonderful day and or night. And 我爱你们.